The coat closet smelled like cedar and someone else's perfume. And Melissa Park was crouched between two fur coats, with a velvet ring box digging into her palm, listening to the man she'd loved for 5 years tell his friends he was done with her. She hadn't planned to be here, hiding in the dark like some pathetic cliché fae. The plan had been simple, actually beautiful, even. She'd reserved the private dining room next door for Nate's 30th birthday, told the hostess she needed 5 minutes alone in the space beforehand to set up the surprise. Candles, his favorite whiskey, the ring she'd spent 4 months secretly designing with a jeweler downtown, a sleek platinum band with their coordinates engraved inside. 5 years together, she was going to ask him to make it forever. But Nate had arrived early. His boys had already claimed the VIP room, loud and loose with top-shelf liquor, and Melissa had ducked into the coat closet to wait them out. Just a few minutes, she told herself. They'll move to the table. I'll slip in, set everything up, and it'll be perfect. That was 40 minutes ago. Now she couldn't move, not because the closet was small. It was, but because her legs had gone numb somewhere around the time Nate said, "5 years with the same woman, you tell me? Wouldn't you be bored?" The laughter that followed was immediate, loud. The kind of laughter men share when they think no woman is listening. Bro, 5 years. That was Jason, Nate's college roommate. I can barely do 5 months. Exactly. Nate's voice was easy, relaxed. The same voice he used when he talked about trading in his car. Samey face, same conversations, same everything. I wake up and I already know what she is going to say before she opens her mouth. It is like living in a rerun. Melissa's fingers tightened around the ring box. The velvet was getting damp from her palms. But she is hot, though, someone else said, Kevin. Maybe, like, objectively. That body, come on. So go for it, Nate said. She could practically hear him shrugging. I don't care, a beat of silence. Then Kevin laughed nervously. Wait, for real, I said what I said. Nah, that is weird. Jason again. You are really telling us to pick up your leftovers? The word landed like a slap, leftovers. 5 years of her life, the holidays she'd organized for his family, the nights she'd stayed up rubbing his back when his stomach acted up, the career opportunities she'd turned down to stay in his city, and she was leftovers, more laughter. Someone clinked a glass. Honestly, Nate continued, and his voice dropped into that conspiratorial tone she used to find charming. I've had my eye on someone, Mia, dance major, 21. You should see her move. Whistles, cheers. Someone said, there he is. Melissa pressed her back against the wall of the closet. The ring box was cutting a rectangle into her skin now. She thought about the scrapbook sitting in her apartment. 5 years of photos, concert tickets, handwritten letters, all arranged chronologically with little captions she'd stayed up until 2 a.m. writing. She thought about the speech she'd rehearsed in the bathroom mirror that morning, the one that started with, I never thought I'd be the one proposing, but you made me brave enough to try. She didn't cry. That surprised her more than anything Nate had said. She kept waiting for the tears, the hot, humiliating flood she'd always associated with heartbreak in movies. But her eyes stayed dry. Her breathing stayed even. Something inside her had shifted quietly and permanently, like a bone setting itself back into place after being out of alignment. For so long, she'd forgotten what straight felt like. The party went on for another 2 hours. She heard every toast, every joke, every casual cruelty. She heard Nate accept a birthday cake she hadn't ordered and blow out candles she hadn't lit. She heard him take a phone call from his mother and say, "Yeah, Melissa's here somewhere. You know how she is, always fussing over details." At 11:47 p.m., the last of them finally stumbled out. The VIP room went quiet. The restaurant staff began shutting off lights, section by section, until the hallway outside the closet was dim and still. Melissa stood up slowly. Her knees ached, her right hand was cramped around the ring box, and she had to peel her fingers open one by one. She looked at the box for a long moment. Then she slid it into her coat pocket, opened the closet door, and stepped out. The restaurant was nearly dark. A single light above the bar cast a long amber glow across the floor, and her shadow stretched out ahead of her, thin, elongated, barely recognizable. She walked toward the exit without looking back. Wone thought. Just one, clear and cold and steady as a blade. It is over. The news traveled the way it always does in those circles. Fast, messy, and with just enough detail to make everyone feel like they had the full story when they didn't. By Wednesday, 3 different people had sent Melissa screenshots. Nate at a rooftop bar with a girl who looked barely old enough to order a cocktail. Nate sending 24 roses to a dance studio downtown. Nate posting a story with a hand, clearly not Melissa's, resting on his knee, captioned with a single music note emoji Mia. 21, dance major. Just like he'd said, Melissa looked at the photos the way you'd look at a weather forecast for a city you no longer lived in. Noted, filed, irrelevant. What she didn't expect was Marcus's BBQ. It was supposed to be a casual thing: burgers, cheap beer, Marcus's terrible playlist. Their whole friend group had been going to his backyard parties since college. Melissa almost didn't show up, but Sophie had called from the West Coast and said, "Go, show your face, don't let him take your friends too." So she went. She wore a white sundress and her favorite gold hoops, and she brought a bottle of Ross Fay, and she told herself she could handle whatever walked through that gate. Then Nate walked through the gate with Mia on his arm, and the entire backyard went quiet. It was the kind of silence that has weight. 20-something people, all suddenly very interested in their drinks, their phones, the pattern on their paper plates. Melissa felt every single pair of eyes land on her and then look away, like she was something too bright or too painful to stare at directly. Mia, of course she was, young and glowing and completely unaware of the room she'd just detonated. She smiled at everyone with the open, eager warmth of someone who had no idea she was a grenade. Nate didn't hesitate. He pulled out a chair, sat Mia down at the main table, draped his arm across the back of her seat, and looked directly at Melissa. "We should talk," he said, not quietly, not privately, right there in front of everyone, with a burger sizzling on the grill and Marcus frozen mid-flip with his spatula. "We've been going back and forth for too long, Melissa. It is done." He squeezed Mia's shoulder. "Mia is different. She is young, she is fun, and I want to give her something real." 23 people heard that sentence. Melissa knew because she could feel every one of them holding their breath. She looked at Nate, really looked at him. The jawline she used to trace with her fingertip. The eyes she used to think held depth but now realized were just dark. The mouth that had kissed her good morning 10,000 times and had just, in front of everyone she knew, called her the opposite of young, fun, and real. "Got it," she said, 2 words. Steady, almost gentle. The way you'd acknowledge a waiter telling you they were out of the soup. She picked up her purse, pushed her chair back, and stood. Nate frowned. "I'll have my driver take you." Number she walked across the yard. No rushing, no stumbling, no dramatic exit. Just a woman leaving a party she no longer wanted to be at. She could feel Mia watching her with something that might have been guilt or might have been curiosity. And she could feel Nate watching her with something that was definitely irritation, because Melissa was not performing the scene he'd scripted in his head. The gate clicked shut behind her. And then, because the universe has a sense of timing, she heard Jason's voice carry over the fence. $20 says she is back by Friday. And Nate laughing, 3 days, she always comes back crying. Melissa stood on the sidewalk for exactly 4 seconds. she let those words land. She let them settle into the place where all the other words lived, boring, leftovers, done with her, and then she started walking. She didn't go to a friend's house. She didn't go to a bar. She went straight home, straight to the closet, and pulled out the scrapbook. It was heavy. She'd used archival quality paper, hand-cut photo corners, acid-free adhesive, 5 years of meticulous love organized by season. Their first trip together, a terrible road trip where the car broke down and they'd laughed until they couldn't breathe. His handwritten note from year 2, "You are the only person I never get tired of." Ticket stubs, Polaroids, a pressed flower from a walk. She doubted he even remembered. She sat on the bedroom floor and began cutting. Slowly at first, then faster. Scissors through photo after photo, through every handwritten word, through the version of herself that had believed all of it. The pieces fell around her like confetti at a party. No one was celebrating. When the scrapbook was nothing but scraps, she went to the kitchen, opened the trash can, and dropped the ring box in. It landed with a dull thud against the coffee grounds and takeout containers. She didn't fish it out. She didn't hesitate. She pulled a sticky note from the drawer, wrote 7 words, "Do whatever you want with everything here," and pressed it to the counter. At 3:15 a.m., she boarded a red-eye heading west. The city she was leaving glittered below her like something beautiful and broken, and she turned off her phone before the wheels left the ground. Sophie was waiting at arrivals with 2 iced coffees and a pair of sunglasses that probably cost more than Melissa's plane ticket. "You look terrible," Sophie said, pulling her into a hug. "We're fixing that today," and she meant it. By noon, Melissa had been dragged through 3 boutiques, a hair salon, and a dim sum place where Sophie ordered everything on the menu and made Melissa eat until she stopped looking like she might shatter. By evening, Sophie had her in a silk camisole and heels, standing on a rooftop bar overlooking the Pacific, holding a glass of something sparkling and pretending she felt as light as she looked. The rooftop was crowded, old college friends, friends of friends, people Sophie had collected over the years the way some people collect vintage records. The air smelled like salt and jasmine and expensive cologne. And for the first time in days, Melissa felt the knot in her chest loosen just slightly. Then the elevator doors opened, and Lucas Ashford walked out. She hadn't seen him in, 4 years? 5. He looked different, and exactly the same. Taller than she remembered. Or maybe he just carried himself differently now. Dark hair pushed back, sleeves rolled to the elbows. The kind of quiet confidence that didn't need to announce itself. He moved through the crowd the way water moves around stones, effortlessly, without disruption, and every woman on that rooftop noticed. 2 girls from their college cohort nearly knocked over their drinks. "Lucas, you never come to these things." He smiled politely, said something Melissa couldn't hear, and then his eyes found hers across the bar. He held her gaze for exactly 2 seconds, long enough to mean something, short enough to deny it, and looked away. Sophie materialized at Melissa's elbow. "He is here for you. We haven't talked in years, Soph. And yet here he is, at a party he'd normally never attend, on the exact night you happen to be in town." Sophie raised a coincidence is God's way of staying anonymous. That is an Einstein quote. It is a Sophie quote now. Drink your champagne. The party wound down around midnight. People started pairing off, calling cars, exchanging numbers. Sophie, who had clearly been planning this since the airport, cornered Lucas by the bar and said, loud enough for Melissa to hear, "Lucas, be a gentleman and make sure Melissa gets back to her hotel safe." Lucas looked at Melissa. She looked at the floor. He looked at Sophie. Sophie looked at him like she would physically fight him if he said no. "Sure," he said. The car ride was quiet, not awkward, just full. The kind of silence between two people who have too much to say and no idea where to start. The city blurred past the windows, all neon and palm trees and unfamiliar streets. And Melissa stared at her reflection in the glass and thought about how strange it was to be in a car with a man who wasn't Nate. They pulled up to the hotel. Melissa unbuckled her seatbelt, turned to thank him, and opened her mouth to say something polite and forgettable. But what came out was, "Want to come up for a drink." The words hung in the air between them. She watched Lucas's expression shift surprise, then something darker, then careful control. She immediately wanted to take it back. This wasn't her. She didn't do this. She was still raw, still bleeding internally from wounds. She hadn't even begun to catalog. And inviting a man up to her hotel room was the emotional equivalent of running a marathon on a broken leg. But Lucas was already opening his door. They made it to the elevator before he kissed her. It wasn't gentle, it wasn't tentative. It was the kind of kiss that had been waiting years to happen, his hand at the back of her neck, her shoulders against the elevator wall, the floors ticking upward like a countdown. The doors opened. They stepped into the hallway, and then Lucas stopped. He put both hands on her shoulders and held her at arm's length, his breathing uneven, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her stomach flip. "Melissa." His voice was rough. "If you are going to regret this tomorrow, I can still walk away right now. No hard feelings. I'll drive home and we'll pretend this didn't happen." She looked at him, really looked at the boy who'd sat behind her in their college lecture hall and never once made a move, at the man who'd shown up tonight at a party he hated because someone told him she'd be there, at the only person in that entire rooftop bar who hadn't looked at her with pity. She rose on her toes and pressed her lips to the corner of his mouth, softly, deliberately. Lucas closed his eyes. When he opened them, he was smiling. Not the polished public smile she'd seen on the rooftop, but something private and a little reckless. "Then don't ever try to take it back," he said, and his thumb traced the exact spot where her lips had touched him, like he was memorizing it. She didn't take it back. Afterward, the room was dark and still, and Lucas was half asleep beside her, one arm draped heavy across her waist, when Melissa felt it rise, sudden and unstoppable, like a wave she hadn't seen coming. She cried, not delicately, not cinematically. She pressed her face into the pillow and sobbed with her whole body. 5 years of unshed tears finally finding their exit. And she hated herself for it, because this wasn't about Lucas. This wasn't about tonight. This was about every time she'd swallowed her pain to keep the peace, and every time she'd told herself, "It is fine. He loves you in his own way." "Stop being so sensitive." Lucas was awake instantly. He didn't ask what was wrong. He just pulled her closer, and she turned into his chest and said the only thing she could manage. "I am sorry, Lucas. I shouldn't have pulled you into this. I am still a mess inside, and that is not fair to you." He was quiet for a moment. Then he cupped her face in both hands, tilting it up so she had to look at him. And his expression was so steady, so certain, that it almost made her cry harder. "You already pulled me in, Melissa." His thumbs wiped her tears with a gentleness that felt almost unbearable. "So you'd better see it through. Here is the thing about falling for someone new when you are still bruised from someone old. Everything becomes a comparison. You don't mean for it to happen. You don't want it to happen, but your brain keeps a running tally whether you like it or not, measuring every gesture against the last 5 years of your life. And sometimes the contrast is so sharp it takes your breath away, like the spicy food. Nate had a sensitive stomach. Melissa had known this from their second date, when he'd winced at a mild salsa, and she'd quietly switched her order to match his. For 5 years, she'd eaten bland, mild curries. No chili flakes, plain pasta. She'd done it so automatically she'd forgotten it was a sacrifice. Lucas took her to a taco truck on the boardwalk, the same one they used to hit after late-night study sessions in college, and ordered everything with extra hot sauce without even asking, because he remembered what she liked before she'd started erasing herself to fit inside someone else's comfort zone. She bit into a taco so spicy her eyes watered, and she laughed. A real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and surprised, and Lucas watched her with an expression she couldn't quite name, like he'd been waiting a long time to hear that sound. Then there were the small things. He pulled her chair out. He wiped the table down before she sat. He poured hot water over her chopsticks at the dim sum place, a habit so automatic it was clearly muscle memory. He noticed when her glass was empty before she did. He remembered she was allergic to shellfish without being told twice. "Your ex trained you well," Melissa teased one afternoon, watching him carefully remove the cilantro from her plate because she'd mentioned once that she didn't love it. Lucas looked up. "I've never had a serious girlfriend." "What?" "One blind date 2 years ago. She talked about her ex for 45 minutes, and I knew by the appetizer it wasn't going to work." He shrugged. "That is it." Melissa stared at him. "Then how do you just know how to do all this?" He didn't answer right away. He finished picking out the cilantro, set her plate back in front of her, and said, "I pay attention to you, Melissa. That is not a skill. I need everyone to stop scrolling and read that line again. That is not a skill. I need everyone to stop scrolling and read that line again. That is not a skill. That is a choice." Do you understand what Lucas just did? He dismantled 5 years of Nate's conditioning in a single sentence. Melissa spent half a decade believing that being loved properly was some rare talent only extraordinary women deserved, that she had to earn every crumb of attention by being smaller, quieter, blander. And here is Lucas casually picking cilantro off her plate because she mentioned it once, telling her that noticing her isn't some grand romantic gesture. It is just what you do when you actually care. The spicy taco scene already wrecked me. Watching her rediscover her own taste buds after years of eating bland food for a man who never once adjusted anything for her. But this line, this is the moment Melissa starts to realize that what she had with Nate wasn't love with flaws. It was starvation dressed up as a relationship. That is a choice. She had to look away because her eyes were doing that burning thing again. 3 weeks in, Lucas said it. They were walking along the waterfront at dusk, the sky doing that impossible West Coast thing where it turns 6 colors at once. And he stopped and turned to her and said, "I want this to be real, Melissa. I want to be with you, not casually, not temporarily, for real." And Melissa, who had been happy, who had been healing, who had been feeling things she thought Nate had permanently broken, felt every wall inside her slam back up. "I can't do relationships anymore, Lucas." Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. "If you want, we can keep this the way it is. No labels, no strings, no promises anyone's going to break." Something shifted in his eyes. Not anger, something worse. Hurt. The kind of hurt that comes from offering someone everything and watching them set it down like it is nothing. He nodded once, grabbed his jacket from the bench, and left without another word. At 3 a.m. Lucas was parked outside Melissa's hotel, leaning against his car, smoking a cigarette he'd bummed from the valet. He didn't smoke, hadn't since college, but his hands needed something to do that wasn't calling her, and his chest needed something to burn that wasn't this. She came to this city, he thought. She came to me. She is not running from something. She is running toward something. She just doesn't know it yet. He finished the cigarette, lit another one, watched the light in her hotel room, 14th floor, third window from the left, and made a decision. He could wait. He would wait, but she was meant to be his, and eventually she'd stop being afraid long enough to see it. Meanwhile, 3 time zones east, Nate was discovering that new and shiny has a very short shelf life. Mia lasted exactly 11 days. The first 3 were electric, all breathless texts and late-night adventures, and the intoxicating novelty of someone who didn't know his flaws yet. By day 4, she'd asked him to define the relationship. By day 7, she'd cried because he forgot to text back. By day 11, she'd thrown a shoe at his head because he'd called her Melissa in his sleep. He didn't fight for it. He didn't even feel the loss. He just felt empty. The kind of empty that no amount of new can fill, because the problem was never the old. The problem was him. His stomach, always fragile, finally gave out. Stress, alcohol, skipped meals. The doctor said it was a bleeding ulcer and told him to rest. He spent 2 nights in the hospital staring at the ceiling, and not a single person who'd laughed at his birthday dinner came to visit. Rachel, one of the few mutual friends who still talked to both of them, texted Melissa, "When are you coming back?" Melissa's reply was brief, "I am not anytime soon." Nate saw the message on Rachel's phone. He grabbed it, read it twice, and hurled it across the room. "Tell her I don't care if she never comes back," he shouted, and slammed the door so hard the frame cracked. That night, he drove to their old apartment. Her sticky note was still on the counter. Her clothes were still in the closet. Her perfume bottle, the one with the pale pink liquid she'd worn every day for 3 years, was still on the bathroom sink, and when he uncapped it and held it to his nose, the smell hit him like a fist. He stood in that bathroom for a long time, holding a bottle of perfume that belonged to a woman who was 3,000 miles away and not coming back. And for the first time, the silence of the apartment didn't feel peaceful. It felt like punishment. Sophie had a gift for saying the thing you needed to hear at the exact moment you were most determined not to hear it. They were at brunch because Sophie believed all emotional breakthroughs should happen over Eggs Benedict when she set down her mimosa and said, "You turned him down, didn't you?" Melissa stabbed a piece of avocado. "I told him we could keep things casual." And he left. He left. Good for him. Sophie leaned back. "Melissa, I love you, but I need to say something, and I need you to actually hear it. Soph, you are not scared of love. You are not scared of commitment. You are not even scared of getting hurt again." Sophie's voice was gentle but immovable. "You are scared because that man spent 5 years making you believe you don't deserve it." Melissa's fork stopped moving. "You are beautiful. You are talented. You've been paying your own bills since you were 22. You moved across the country for him, built a life around him, and when he got bored, he threw you away like you were disposable." Sophie reached across the table and grabbed her hand. "But you are not disposable, Melissa. You never were. And the fact that you can't see that is the only thing Nate ever successfully gave you." Melissa's eyes were burning again. She blinked hard. "Now call Lucas," Sophie said. "You have no idea how happy that man is going to be." Melissa sat in her car for 20 minutes before she dialed. Her heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her teeth. He picked up on the first ring like he'd been waiting. "Melissa," high silence. Then, carefully, "So what am I? Still just casual?" She closed her eyes, took a breath, and said very quietly, "Boyfriend." The sound Lucas made on the other end of the line, half laugh, half exhale, like he'd been holding his breath for weeks, was the most beautiful thing she'd ever heard. "Say it again. Don't push it. Say it again, Melissa." "Boyfriend, you are my boyfriend." "Are you happy now?" He was. She could hear it in every syllable, in the way his voice cracked, just slightly on the word yes, in the way a 31-year-old man who ran a company and wore tailored suits and intimidated entire boardrooms sounded. In that moment, like a kid who'd just been told Christmas was coming early. Incredibly, he said, incredibly happy. For months. That is how long Melissa had been gone when Nate finally broke down and called. It was 1 a.m. on his end, the hour when pride dissolves and loneliness becomes unbearable. He'd been drinking. Not enough to be sloppy, but enough to convince himself this was a good idea. Enough to forget that the last time he'd mentioned Melissa's name, he'd told a room full of people she'd come crawling back in 3 days. It had been 122 days. But who was counting? The phone rang 4 times 5. He was about to hang up, already rehearsing the lie he'd tell himself about not caring, when someone picked up. But it wasn't Melissa. Hello? A man's voice, low, unhurried, faintly amused, like he already knew exactly who was calling and found it entertaining. Nate's grip tightened on the phone. Who is this? Where is Melissa? A soft laugh. The sound of sheets rustling. Melissa was up late last night. She is still sleeping. The sentence landed like a grenade. Nate's vision went red at the edges. He could hear his own heartbeat in his ears, loud and furious, and somewhere beneath the rage was something worse. The sickening recognition that this voice was calm in a way that meant comfort, that meant familiarity, that meant this wasn't the first night. Who the hell is this? His voice cracked. Put Melissa on the phone now. She can't. The voice was patient, almost gentle, the way you'd explain something simple to a child. I told you, she is still asleep. You'd better not be taking advantage of her, or I swear to God, Nate. The man said his name like he knew him, like he'd heard stories, like he'd already formed an opinion and found him lacking. She is fine. She is more than fine. Go to sleep. Click. The audacity, the absolute audacity of this man. Lucas answered Melissa's phone at 1 a.m., told her ex-boyfriend she was sleeping peacefully, said, "She is more than fine," and hung up like he was declining a telemarketer. No yelling, no posturing, no territorial chest beating, just calm, devastating, almost gentle dismissal. Go to sleep, Nate. Like he was putting a child to bed. And the detail that kills me, the sound of sheets rustling. The writer didn't need to spell it out. That single sound effect told Nate everything. She is in someone else's bed. She is comfortable there. And she is sleeping the kind of deep sleep that only comes from feeling completely safe. Nate called back 5 times, straight to voicemail. Every single time, Lucas turned off the phone and kissed Melissa's temple while she slept. That is a man who already knows he is one and doesn't need to prove it. The line went dead. Nate called back immediately. Straight to voicemail, called again. Voicemail again, until his phone screen blurred and he realized his hands were shaking so badly he could barely hit the button. On the other side of the country, Lucas set the phone on the nightstand, turned it off, and looked down at Melissa, who was curled against his side with her hair fanned across his chest, still deep in the kind of sleep that only comes when someone feels completely safe. He leaned down and pressed his lips to her temple. She stirred but didn't wake. He stayed like that for a long time, watching her breathe, one hand resting on the curve of her waist, and thought, you had her for 5 years, and you didn't know what you had. I've had her for 4 months, and I already know I'll never let go. The next afternoon, Melissa walked out of the hotel lobby with her arm linked through Lucas's, laughing at something he'd said about the valet parking his car crooked. When she saw him, Nate was leaning against a black sedan that had clearly been driven through the night. His shirt was wrinkled, his jaw unshaven, his eyes bloodshot and bruised with sleeplessness. He looked like a man who had crossed 3 time zones on fury and arrived with nothing left but desperation. Melissa. He said her name the way he used to. Soft, almost reverent. The way he'd said it in the early years when he still thought she was the most remarkable thing that had ever happened to him. Before he got comfortable, before he got bored, before he decided she was a rerun. Melissa's arm tightened on Lucas's. She didn't speak. Nate took a step forward. His voice was raw. "Let's get married. I'll do it right this time. I'll be better. I swear, I'll be everything you needed me to be." The words hung in the bright afternoon air, and Melissa felt something she didn't expect. Nothing. No anger, no sadness, no flicker of the old, just a vast, clean emptiness where he used to live inside her. "Am I some kind of joke to you?" Her voice was quiet, but it carried. "You walk away when you want. You come back when you want. You humiliate me in front of everyone we know, replace me in a week, and now you show up here talking about marriage." She shook her head. "Who gave you that right, Nate? Who told you I'd still be waiting?" His eyes flicked to Lucas. Something ugly moved across his face. "You think he is real?" Nate's voice shifted, harder. Now, the charm stripped away to reveal the thing underneath. "You think this is genuine?" "Melissa, 3 years ago, this man crushed my company's biggest deal. He cost me millions, and now he is suddenly interested in you." A bitter laugh. "Wake up, you are not his girlfriend. You are his revenge." Lucas didn't move, didn't flinch, just stood there with Melissa's hand on his arm and watched Nate the way you'd watch a storm that has already spent itself. "Every man is the same, Melissa." Nate was almost pleading now. "None of them are genuine. You were with me for 5 years. You think he can handle that? You think this won't end the same way?" Silence. Then Melissa stepped forward, slowly, deliberately, until she was close enough to see the broken blood vessels in Nate's eyes, close enough to smell the stale coffee and overnight flight on his clothes, close enough to remember every single time she'd stood this close to him and chosen to stay. She slapped him. Not a movie slap, theatrical and performative. A real one, open palm, full force, the sound sharp enough to make the valet flinch 20 feet away. Nate's head snapped to the side, and when he turned back, there was a perfect red print blooming across his cheek. "I wasted 5 years being blind enough to love you," Melissa said, and her voice didn't shake. 5 years of making myself smaller so you could feel bigger. 5 years of pretending your crumbs were a feast, because I was too afraid to admit I was starving. She stepped back. "Don't ever show up in front of me again. Looking at you makes me sick." Nate lunged, not at Melissa, but at Lucas, grabbing his collar with both hands, and Lucas's fist connected with Nate's jaw before the first word left his mouth. They went down hard, a tangle of expensive fabric and raw fury. And it took 2 valets and a security guard to pull them apart. Lucas came away with a split lip and a bruise forming along his cheekbone. Nate came away with worse. Melissa. Lucas turned to her, one hand pressed to his bleeding mouth, and his expression shifted instantly from fury to something almost comically pitiful. "Melissa, look at my face. Am I going to be disfigured? Tell me honestly, is my modeling career over?" "You don't have a modeling career." "I could have." This face had potential. He winced dramatically. "I think I need medical attention and sympathy. Lots of sympathy." "You are an idiot," Melissa said. But she was already pulling a tissue from her bag, already tilting his chin up with one hand and dabbing the blood from his lip with the other. Her touch so gentle it contradicted every word coming out of her mouth. You absolute idiot. You didn't have to hit him. He grabbed me first. I was defending my honor. You were showing off. I was defending my honor while showing off, multitasking. Behind them, Nate stood alone on the sidewalk. The security guard had released him but stayed close. Watching, his collar was torn. His lip was swelling. And he was staring at Melissa's back, at the way she was fussing over Lucas's face, at the way Lucas was leaning into her touch like it was the only medicine he needed, at the easy, intimate rhythm of two people who had already built something he couldn't break. The afternoon sun was dropping toward the ocean, and it caught Nate in that golden, merciless light that makes everything look beautiful and sad at the same time. His shadow stretched long across the pavement behind him, thin, solitary, pointing back the way he'd come. She wasn't coming back, he'd said 3 days. It had been 4 months. And standing there with a bruised jaw and a torn shirt in a city that wasn't his, watching the woman he'd thrown away tend to the man who'd caught her. Nate finally understood something he should have known all along. You don't get unlimited chances with someone who has learned what she is worth. He got back in the car. The driver asked where to. Nate said nothing for a long time, then, home. The sedan pulled away from the curb, and Melissa didn't turn around. She didn't watch him leave. She didn't feel the pull she'd always felt before, that invisible thread that used to tug at her chest every time he walked away, whispering, "Go after him. Fix it. Make it right." The thread was gone, cut clean, and in its place was something she hadn't felt in 5 years. Peace. Lucas proposed on a Tuesday, not a holiday, not an anniversary, not a carefully orchestrated event with hidden photographers and a string quartet. Just a Tuesday in November, 8 months after a woman with mascara-stained cheeks had stepped off a red-eye flight and into a life she hadn't planned. He'd been drinking, not heavily, but enough to make him honest in the way he usually kept locked behind boardroom composure and well-timed humor. They were on the couch in his apartment, her feet in his lap, a movie neither of them was watching flickering on the screen, and he'd been quiet for so long she thought he'd fallen asleep. Then he said, "Marry me." Melissa looked at him. His eyes were slightly glassy, his hair a mess from running his hands through it. A habit she'd learned meant he was nervous, and he was holding a ring box she hadn't seen him pull out. It wasn't velvet. It was a small wooden box, hand-carved, with her initials burned into the lid. "I had a whole speech," he said. "I wrote it down and everything, 3 drafts. Sophie helped with the second one, which was a mistake because she made it too funny, and I kept laughing during practice. Lucas, but I forgot all of it the second I opened my mouth, so I am just going to say the thing I actually mean." He sat up, took her hands, and looked at her with an expression so open and unguarded it almost hurt to witness. "Melissa, we're not going to have just 5 years." His voice cracked on the number. He swallowed hard and kept going. "We're going to have a lifetime. I am going to annoy you for decades. I am going to burn dinner and forget to take out the trash and probably say something stupid at least once a week that makes you want to throw a shoe at my head. But I am going to be there every morning, every night, every boring, ordinary, extraordinary day. I am going to be there, and I am going to choose you, and I am never, never going to make you feel like you are not enough." He opened the box. The ring inside was simple, a thin gold band with a single stone, warm and clear, the kind of ring that doesn't scream but whispers. "So Tuesday, couch, bad movie, will you marry me?" Melissa looked at the ring. She looked at Lucas. She thought about the last man who'd almost received a ring from her, the platinum band with the engraved coordinates, designed for a man who was telling his friends he was bored of her while she hid in a closet and listened. She thought about the girl she'd been then, the one who made herself small. The one who ate bland food and swallowed sharp words and called it love because she didn't know what love was supposed to taste like. She thought about Sophie's words at brunch. You are not scared of love. You are scared because he made you believe you don't deserve it. And she thought about what she knew now, what the last 8 months had taught her with a patience and gentleness she hadn't known existed. That love wasn't supposed to make you smaller, that the right person doesn't get bored of you, they get more fascinated, that you can be someone's whole world without losing yourself in the process. She knew, of course, that promises are easy. Everyone means it when they say it. The words forever and always and I'll never hurt you are always sincere at the moment of speaking. It is the keeping that is hard. It is the years that test them. She'd learned that lesson the most painful way possible, and she'd carry the scar of it for the rest of her life. But looking at Lucas, nervous, slightly drunk, holding a hand-carved box with her initials on it, his split lip from the fight still not fully healed, she realized something. She wasn't trusting him blindly. She was trusting herself. Trusting that she'd learned to recognize the difference between a man who loves the idea of her and a man who loves her. Trusting that if it ever went wrong again, she'd have the strength to walk away. Not in 5 years, not after a closet full of cruelty, but immediately, cleanly, with her dignity intact. She was betting on herself. And for the first time, that felt like a safe bet. Yes, she said, Tuesday couch. Bad movie. Yes. Lucas slid the ring onto her finger, and his hands were shaking so badly it took 2 tries. And when it was done, he pulled her into his chest and held her so tightly she could feel his heartbeat against her collarbone. Fast, unsteady, the heartbeat of a man who had wanted something for so long, he'd almost stopped believing he could have it. Thank God, he murmured into her hair. I really didn't have a backup plan. I am not crying. You're crying. After the most perfectly imperfect proposal in literary history, on a Tuesday, on a couch, during a bad movie, slightly drunk, with a hand-carved wooden box and 3 forgotten speech drafts. Lucas slides the ring on with shaking hands that take 2 tries, pulls her into his chest, and whispers, thank God I really didn't have a backup plan. This man built a company. He intimidates boardrooms. He knocked Nate flat with 1 punch. And here he is, trembling like a teenager, because the woman he has loved since a college lecture hall finally said yes. What makes this moment extraordinary isn't the romance. It is the vulnerability. He had no backup plan, no safety net, no carefully calculated exit strategy. He bet everything on her, and he was terrified. And that, ladies, is the difference between a man who keeps his options open and a man who closes every door except the one that leads to you. The days after that were unremarkable in the best possible way. No grand gestures, no dramatic declarations, just the slow, steady accumulation of ordinary moments that, stacked together, build a life. Lucas burned dinner at least twice a week, as promised. Melissa discovered he was pathologically incapable of folding laundry, but could fix anything mechanical with his bare hands. They argued about thermostat settings and grocery lists, and whose turn it was to walk the neighbor's dog they'd somehow agreed to watch. They fell asleep on the couch more often than in bed. They built something that wasn't perfect, but was real, warm, and imperfect and alive in all the ways that mattered. And the wound that Nate had left, that deep, jagged thing that had made Melissa believe she was boring, disposable, not enough, began to close. Not all at once, not dramatically, but slowly, the way skin heals over time from the edges inward, until one day you look down and realize the scar is still there, but it doesn't hurt to touch anymore. Melissa didn't forget, she didn't need to. The memory of that closet, of those words, of the woman she'd been, It stayed with her like a compass, always pointing toward the truth. And this time, I believe it. She heard about Nate from time to time through Rachel, mostly who still lived on the East Coast and still couldn't resist passing along news like it was a public service. He was alone, still in the old apartment. He'd turned down a transfer to another city because, and this was Rachel's theory, not fact, he couldn't bring himself to leave the place where Melissa's things still lived, because they were still there. All of it, her books on the shelf arranged the way she liked them, by color, not author, which used to drive him crazy, her running shoes by the door, her favorite mug in the cabinet, the one with the chipped handle she'd refused to throw away, her perfume bottle on the bathroom sink, the pale pink liquid slowly evaporating, millimeter by millimeter, like a clock counting down to something no one had set a timer for. He hadn't moved any of it, hadn't packed it up, hadn't thrown it out, hadn't asked anyone to come collect it. It just stayed, a museum of a relationship that had ended, not with an explosion, but with a woman quietly walking out of a coat closet and deciding she was done. Some nights, Rachel said, his light was on until 3 or 4 a.m. some mornings. The car didn't move from the driveway. He went to work, came home, and existed in the space between the things she'd left behind, like a man haunting his own apartment. Melissa listened to these updates and felt, what? Not satisfaction, not pity, something like the ache you feel when you drive past a house you used to live in and see that the garden you planted has gone to weeds. You don't want to go back. You don't regret leaving, but you remember what it looked like when it was blooming. And there is a sadness in knowing that no one is taking care of it anymore. She didn't call him. She didn't send a message. She didn't need to. Some doors, once closed, are meant to stay that way. On a Tuesday evening in their second year together, Melissa was washing dishes, and Lucas was behind her, arms wrapped around her waist, chin on her shoulder, humming something off-key. The kitchen smelled like the garlic bread he'd somehow managed not to burn, and the window above the sink framed a sky going soft with dusk. "Hey," he said. "Hey, I love you. I know. You told me 14 minutes ago. That was 14 minutes ago. This is now, keep up." She laughed, that real laugh, the deep one, the one he'd first heard over tacos on the boardwalk and had spent every day since trying to earn again. Outside, the sky dimmed. The streetlights came on one by one, and somewhere far away, 3,000 miles, and a lifetime ago, a perfume bottle sat on a bathroom sink in an empty apartment, catching the last of the light before the room went dark. Melissa dried her hands, turned around in Lucas's arms, and kissed him. She didn't look back. She never looked back. Here is what I keep thinking about long after this story ends. We talk a lot about knowing your worth, but this story shows what that actually looks like in practice. It is not a lightning bolt. It is not a makeover montage. It is eating spicy food again after 5 years of bland. It is letting someone pick cilantro off your plate without feeling like you. It is learning that the right person doesn't ask you to shrink. They make more room. But here is the part that really gets me. Melissa's healing wasn't about Lucas. He was wonderful. Yes, but the real turning point was Sophie's words at brunch. You are not scared of love. You are scared because he made you believe you don't deserve it. Melissa didn't need a new man to save her. She needed to stop believing the story Nate had written about her, that she was boring, disposable, a rerun. She needed to trust herself enough to recognize love when it showed up without a script. And that perfume bottle on the bathroom sink in Nate's empty apartment slowly evaporating. That is not a love story. That is a haunting. Some people don't realize what they had until it is literally disappearing into thin air, millimeter by millimeter. And by then, it is far too late. So here is my question for you. Are you still eating bland food for someone who wouldn't even adjust the thermostat for you? Are you still shrinking? Because somewhere out there, there is a Lucas picking cilantro off your plate. Not because you asked, but because he was paying attention all along.